tide licked at her body like a lover's tongue, teasing the line between death and life. Cold salt water churned in her lungs, forcing out a gurgling breath as the waves withdrew, leaving her sprawled upon the damp sand. Her body, draped in tatters of what once might have been fine silk, was slick with brine, her pale skin painted in trails of blood from unseen wounds. Her dark hair, long and tangled, clung to her face in strands thick with seaweed and silt. The world was a blur of darkness and whispers, the echoes of the void from which she had just emerged. Her name, what was her name? She could not remember. The first thing she became aware of, beyond the wet press of sand beneath her, was the stench. It hit her before the voices did, a vile musk of sweat, rotting fish, and unwashed bodies. It filled her nostrils, a pungent, animalistic reek, raw and primal. She wanted to recoil, to sink back into the cold embrace of the tide, but her body was weak, unresponsive. "She's breathing," a rough voice grunted, thick with a guttural accent. "Looks like we got a surprise, boys," another chuckled, a sound like gravel rolling over rusted iron. Footsteps squelched through the wet sand surrounding her. The scent intensified, overwhelming as their bodies loomed closer. The first was a hulking man, his face a patchwork of scars and bristling beard, his hair matted with grease. He wore a tattered tunic, stained with fish guts, and thick leather boots that were cracked with age. A rusted hook hung from his belt, swaying as he took another step toward her. "Reckon she washed up from that wreck. Must be one of them highborns." His tongue flicked out to wet, chapped lips. "Bet she's never been with a real man before." Another man, smaller but no less foul, let out a snort. His teeth were blackened stumps, his nose bulbous and red with drink. He adjusted the filthy sash at his waist, eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Question is, who gets first go?" She could feel their gaze crawling over her like 1,000 scuttling insects. A tremor rippled through her fingers as her body slowly reawakened. The warmth returned, deep within her core, pulsing, whispering, Lothenia's gift. A hunger unfurled in her belly, coiling like a serpent. The scarred man reached out with a meaty hand, fingers calloused and stained yellow from years of labor. The moment he touched her skin, a shock of heat surged through her, igniting something deep within. A whisper slithered through her mind. "Take them, my child, take what is yours." Her eyes fluttered open and the world snapped into focus. The sky above was the color of bruises, the sun barely breaking through the storm-stained clouds. The men surrounded her, 3 in total, their stench suffocating. But now she could smell more than just filth. She could smell their desire, thick and heady, curling through the air like incense. It filled her with something new, something electric. A slow, sultry smile curled her lips. "First go?" she purred, her voice like silk laced with honeyed venom. "Why choose when you can all have me?" Surprise flickered across their faces, hesitation warring with lust. The scarred man's grip tightened on her arm, and she let out a soft, breathy sigh, arching into his touch. She felt the way their pulses quickened, their blood thrumming beneath their skin. They had no idea they were already lost. Then she moved. Her hand shot out, fingers pressing against the scarred man's throat. A gasp, a gurgle. His pupils dilated as a wave of pleasure crashed through him. His knees buckled, and he fell to the sand, panting like a dog in heat. The others watched, stunned, arousal warring with confusion. What did you do to him?" the smaller one stammered. Daemonweaver laughed. The sound was rich, intoxicating. "I gave him what he wanted." She traced her fingers down her own arm, shivering at the sensation of power unfurling in her veins. But he was greedy, and greed must be punished. The pleasure in the scarred man's eyes twisted into something else. Pain. He let out a strangled scream as the ecstasy she had fed him turned razor-sharp, pleasure turning to torment. His skin blackened, veins bulging as his body convulsed. His eyes rolled back, and then, with a sickening crunch, his chest collapsed inward as though something had sucked the life from him. The husk of his body fell, limp and shriveled, onto the sand. The remaining 2 men staggered back, horror dawning in their eyes. "Demon," the toothless one whispered. Daemonweaver rose from the sand, her limbs fluid, graceful. She inhaled deeply, savoring the taste of fear that now stained the air. The hunger inside her grew, roaring, demanding more. "You have no idea." The small man turned to run, but she was upon him in an instant. Her hand plunged into his chest, not piercing flesh, but sinking through it like mist. His mouth opened in a silent scream as she gripped something within him, something unseen, something vital. With a slow, deliberate pull, she tore his soul from his body. He dropped like a puppet with its strings cut, his flesh cold, his eyes vacant. The last man fell to his knees, shaking his hands raised in a pitiful plea. "Please, goddess, have mercy." Demonweaver tilted her head, considering him. A moment passed, then another, and then she smiled. "There is no mercy." With a flick of her wrist, she ended him. The waves rolled in, washing away the blood, but the sand would remember. The air would remember. And as Daemonweaver stood upon the shore, reborn in blood and power, she knew one thing with certainty. This world would remember her,